Yeah. They tried to say that I wouldn't get it, but now I'm on the road. They tried to say that God isn't in it, but now I seem to know. Last thing that I would want is for y'all to miss the show. If you can't beat them, you better join them, cause now we about to go. Look at them. Look at them. Look at them. Look at them. Wait, hold up, they weren't trying to let me in, so I had to go through the window. Now me and Spec, we making hits. Took some time, but now I win. Don't be shocked, just how it is. Since I got involved, I swear, man, just no limit. Never look back, I gotta go. It's the return of the prodigal. Finally found that pot of gold. Now they wishing well for all my goals. Never forget where I came from. Thousands of kids being healed up. I just got back from Mars, and that plane ride was a long one. They tried to say that I wouldn't get it, but now I'm on the road. They tried to say that God isn't in it, but now I seem to know. Last thing that I would want is for y'all to miss the show.
I close my eyes and colors fly. There's no hiding something with the words flowing sweet. You take the lead and I will unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song. I was buried beneath my shame. Oh, something with the words, I don't have them here because there's no band, but it's okay. Hey, that rhymed. What's up, Remnant Youth? It's Andrew here. I think I just scared Leland. He's my camera guy tonight. He's definitely holding his chest. He may be having a heart attack, but we'll check on him after all of this, because what I gotta say is super important. So what in the world was I just doing just now? As Leland informed me it was the cringiest thing ever, but you know what? I don't care, because it was fun. And hopefully it made you laugh, but really, honestly, what was I doing? Well, what we're gonna do tonight is we're gonna talk about worship. For those of you who don't know, maybe you didn't see it, we're titling this whole series Make Space or Fake Space. And so I want you guys to keep that in mind. If you're taking notes right now, write down, am I making space or am I faking my space? And so I want you to write that down, making space or faking space. And we're going to talk tonight about worship. Worship. We're going to talk about worship more specifically as a spiritual discipline. You don't really think about it too much when you think about worship. You just think, I go to church on Sunday and I worship during the worship time, and then I sit down like a good little boy or girl and listen to my pastor preach. I never really thought about worship as a discipline before, having spiritual discipline such as worship. The word worship, man, if you look up the definition, it comes with a lot of baggage. It has a lot of explanation. You can look at a lot of different portions of the definition of worship and apply it to a lot of different things. But I want to know, more importantly, have you ever been in the situation during worship where maybe you said, lifting my hands, this is kind of awkward. Like, do I lift them during the chorus? Do I, immediately pull them down when the chorus is over because we're singing a verse and you can't raise your hands during a verse? Or do you, ever sit there and worry if I raise my hands, is my shirt long enough? I don't want to show my stomach, Do you ever have those things pop into your head? Do you ever, wonder, if my shirt is too short, maybe I could just go halvesies and be like this, like the T-Rex worship, just, rawr, Jesus, you know what I'm saying? Maybe worship, is something that is emotional, and I know for a lot of us, it can be. Are you ever that person that's like, man, I could not be a crier and be a worshiper all at the same time? There's just no way. Like, I've got my life together. I don't need to cry. Like, have you ever thought about that before? Maybe you're sitting there and you're like, well, I want to worship, but man, I'm just not really feeling this song. Like, I mean, we sang it a couple weeks ago, and now here we are singing it again. Or maybe it's such a new song that you're just not familiar with it, and maybe it's just, like, you just flat out in your heart are like, I'm just not into it. I'm not feeling the song. Has that ever happened to you? Those are things that popped into my head when I'm thinking about worship as a spiritual discipline. Have you ever had a worship song playing and you're like, oh, I love this song, and you're like really getting into it, and then you get ready to start singing, and then you realize, like me, like, I can't sing, so I don't want to worship loudly. I don't want anybody else to hear me because I don't want them to hear my voice. So you're just kind of like, does that work? Like, you just mouthing the words? So, I mean, those are things that pop in your head. Are you treating worship as a spiritual discipline? Maybe you feel like, oh man, I would worship, but you know what? That's what the worship team is for. They're on stage. They're the worship team. I'm just gonna sit back and I'm just gonna chill. I'm gonna support them, and I'm gonna smile for them and give them the thumbs up, like, you guys are doing great. Like, do you ever think like worship isn't for you, but it's for the worship team instead? Man, those are things that just like pop into my head sometimes when I'm worshiping. I never looked at worship as a spiritual discipline. Maybe you are one of those people who, love to worship, who, don't mind raising your hands. You don't mind singing out loud. You don't mind, jumping up and down. You don't mind anybody else hearing you, seeing you, or anything like that. Maybe you're one of those people that are just worship without a care in the world. But then it takes just a couple of people who may be sitting near you who are not into worship at all and are too busy, playing on their phones, taking Instagram selfies, and, talking amongst themselves, and you just want to look over and be like, stop talking! Right? You have ever thought about that? Like, have you ever been in a worship time where the song is just like really touching you, and all you hear is snickering and talking behind you, and you just want to turn around and tell them to please shut it, right? I've been there. I witnessed that at camp last year. Just saying. You know who you are. Maybe you're the ones that are really into worship and you love worship, but sometimes the distractions get to be too much and it's really hard to focus because there's too much going on around you. Or maybe none of those things are you. Maybe you're new to the church. Maybe you're not even a Christ follower yet. And you're asking yourself, like, can I still participate even though I don't have Jesus in my heart? Can I still sing and jump around with all of my friends that are here, even though, I haven't asked Jesus to forgive me? Maybe you're one that, questions, like, will my worship mean anything to Jesus because I don't have that relationship with him? All of those things are valuable questions and okay questions to be asking yourself. But really, worship is all from the heart. I'm going to have you guys write down something. This is a phrase that has popped into my head as I was preparing this message. And that is, worship is not just about singing. Worship is not just about singing. And we're going to explain that as we dive in a little bit further. All right, so we're going to nerd out real quick. And I've got my friend Leslie who's going to explain to you from a scientific standpoint of what worship does using the explanation through neuroscience. Neuroscience, that's right. We are about to nerd out, y'all.
I'm going to try to explain this in the simplest way possible. So scholars and researchers have done tons of study on the brain during worship, like what happens in our minds when we worship and sing to God. When we listen to music, any music, not just worship music, a lot of our brain is really active, especially the areas that process sound. But also, your brain is active in your left temporal lobe, that's where language happens. And in the right hemisphere, that's where creativity happens. And in your corpus callosum, that's the channel of neural pathways between both hemispheres of your brain. See, there's one level of neuroactivity associated with just listening to music, but there's a whole nother level of activity that happens when it comes to actively participating in or creating together. as we do when we're singing. When you look at what happens in a room full of Christians singing praise music, it's incredibly participatory compared to just being at a concert or listening in your car. Everyone who is singing along is contributing to the environment of the room, and that whole "we're all in this together," it amplifies the effects that music has on our thoughts and our awareness. And this comes with lots of benefits. First, an increased capacity to process language. Second, a positive state of mind. Third, a higher sense of self-worth and self-esteem. When we worship together, a room full of brains start to create these neurological patterns that are similar to each other. We see this in a brain scan. As people start to contemplate everything that's happening, the lyrics, the singing, the environment of the room, you start to rise and transcend your focus beyond yourself. You go from thinking about yourself and your needs, to your family, to your community, to your city, to your part of the world, to all of humanity, and then ultimately to God. You see, worship steps you into these broader views of reality. This transcendent state is amplified by the music and by everyone doing it together. And because of our social identities, because of the power of music, because of the participation that's happening, it creates such an elevated experience. It gives a greater chance for other people to join in and to experience God. So yeah, worship is not just about singing. Worship actually helps us say, it's not about me. Worship unifies us with God and others.
All right, so that was worship from a scientific view. And man, it really does a great job. Leslie did a great job of explaining what's happening to the different neurons and different things that are going on inside your brain during worship. God created all of that, and He created us to have a relationship with Him. He created us to worship Him, and the fact that He was able to so intricately do what He does with our brain through the words and through music when they come together in a creative force, man, that is amazing. So that was worship from a scientific view. But let's look at worship from a cultural view. If worship, like I said a moment ago, if worship isn't just about singing, is not just about singing, then what is it about? Write this down. Worship it's about proving your priorities. It's about proving your priorities. And so, what are you worshiping? That's the question we all have to ask ourselves. What are we worshiping? Because I know for a fact that there's some that, man, there's a lot of things going on in your life that's taking up time and that you put a lot of energy behind. And, things like, are you worried about possessions? Are you worried about your image? Are you worried about, different things like that? And none of those things are necessarily bad. It's only proving my point that we are able to worship without song. So it begs the question, what are you worshiping? I want you to think about what it is that you might be in your life worshiping, and maybe you don't even realize what it is that you're worshiping. I want you to just try this. If you are having a hard time figuring out what you give most of your time to, most of your energy to, I'm going to challenge you to ask yourself this. What do your hands spend the most time doing? Maybe your hand is always with your phone. Or maybe your hand always has a video game controller in it. Maybe your hand, has a keyboard in front of it, and you're writing things and saying things to people, on the internet that maybe you shouldn't be. Maybe it's a pencil that's in your hand because you're so focused on your grades. You're so focused on making sure that you set that mark, that you excel, that you do well in school. Those aren't bad things, but you could be unknowingly worshiping those things. If worship isn't just about singing, then what is it about? Guys, it's about proving your priorities. So, my question is what are you worshiping? Where are your priorities? Where are your priorities? And remember what I said. Worship is about proving your priorities. So culture will tell you all the time that it's okay to have a phone, and it's okay to spend time on Instagram and Snapchat, and it's okay to play video games. In fact, here, these games are free to download today, and you can play these games and all of this stuff. That's what culture is going to tell you. And so culture is going to force you in a way to unknowingly be worshiping things that are taking priority away from God. Man, if that doesn't hit you hard, I don't know. Are you, hello, McFly? And I would have never, at your guys' age, I would have never once thought about it's through my hands that are showing what my priorities are. And isn't it interesting that oftentimes when we worship, what do we do with our hands? We lift them up and surrender to God. So we've looked at worship through the scientific viewpoint. We've looked at worship through a cultural viewpoint. And so finally, the last part is we're going to look at worship through a biblical viewpoint. When we think about worship at church, it's really about one thing, just one thing. It's about making God's priority our priority. Let's look at just a couple of examples real quick when it comes to worship from a biblical standpoint, okay? We're going to start with the disciples. What was their job? What was their occupation? Fishermen. What in that time frame did fishermen do? Man, they would go out, they would sail into the sea, and then what would they do? They would throw their nets, they would be having all these ropes, they'd be pulling, all of these things, they'd be working with their hands, guys. Jesus called these fishermen, and he said, "Follow me, and I will make you fisher of men." Now, first of all, if I was a fisherman in that time frame and somebody came up to me and said, "Follow me and I'll make you a fisher of men," I'd be like, time out, hold on. What do you mean? Do I need to bring my nets? Are we catching people? Like, what are we doing? Like, that would be a legit question I would ask. But these dudes did not ask that. No, what they did is they dropped their nets and they said, "Lord," they said, "Jesus, I am going to make your priority my priority." What about also in the Bible, later on in Scripture, Jesus said, we need to feed these thousands of people. Disciples are asking, "What are we going to do, Lord?" And what did Jesus say? He goes, "Okay." And the boy willingly gave Jesus his meal to bless others. He willingly gave Jesus his lunch and said, "You know what? I know this is mine, but Lord, you can do so much more with it than I could ever do." And ended up, Jesus, what did he do? He performed the miracle and fed thousands of people that day. But the boy was faithful in worship. If I do this on my own, I'm going to feed just me. But if I give this to you, Lord, through worship, if I obediently give this to you, you're going to do so much more with it. Guys, that's wild. Think about applying that to your life. Think about applying that to what you do day in and day out. Think about applying that to things that you're good at. All right, we're going to apply this to one more thing biblically. Let's think about Jesus for a second. Jesus, he could have stayed popular. He could have stayed, living a comfortable life. He could have stayed, where he had a little bit of fame, because of some of the miracles he started performing. He could have had, a big name. He was popular. There was, rumors about him and the miracles he was doing going all over Jerusalem. And so he could have comfortably stayed right then, right there, and been perfectly fine. But even Jesus, guys, said, "God, not my priority, but your priority." Guys, there's story after story about people dropping, their comfortable routines to ask God, "What do you want me to do with my life? Because I know it's more than I can do on my own. I know that there's more in my life that you can do, God, that I would mess up. I would just completely, if I tried doing everything on my own, I would make a mess of the situation." And I know I'm not alone in that. I've talked to many friends and whatnot who have all echoed that same thing. Man, if I tried doing anything and handling any situation in my life and not giving them to God, man, I'm telling you right now, like, I would mess it up bad. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a challenge, okay? I want you guys to think about giving up something that takes up space in your life. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about worship and we're going to talk about fasting. And I would just encourage you guys, especially right now, if you look at the condition that our nation is in right now. You look at the turmoil that our nation is having and dealing with right now. It can be scary, but man, I'm telling you right now that if you guys do anything with what's going on around you, I would encourage you guys to do one thing, and that's worship. Because it's through God and through worshiping God that God comes and just loves on you and loves on those around you and takes care of you and helps guide you and helps give you wisdom and helps strengthen you. And man, I'm speaking from personal experience here. There's been many times, many seasons that I've been in my life where I didn't think I was going to make it out of it. I didn't think I was going to make it through. And it wasn't until I gave everything to God and worshiped Him did I realize, man, He's going to see me through this. Whatever it is that you're going to give up, whatever it is that you're going to fast, I want you to say this: God, I'm giving you this because I want it to be about your priority, not mine. I want to worship you through my sacrifice. Guys, if we do this, man, who knows what could happen? Who knows what could happen in the city of York? Who knows what could happen in surrounding communities? When we start laying down the distractions of our lives, laying down what's keeping our hands the most occupied, whether it be a phone or a computer or a video game controller or a book or a pencil or whatever it is that you say is your one thing that's in your hand more than anything. If we do this, guys, I don't know if we'd be ready to see what it is that God's going to do with it. Because I'm telling you right now, we give this up, God is going to do some amazing, amazing things.
We're in love with you. No one else can take your place. One thing I desire, only this I seek, just to dwell here forever. This will be my posture, laying at your feet. Oh, just to dwell here forever. Dearest Father, closest friend, most beautiful, most beautiful, you are, dearest Father, closest friend, most beautiful, you are, most beautiful. One thing I desire, only this I seek, just to dwell here forever. This will be my posture, laying at your feet. Oh, just to dwell here forever. Dearest Father, you are most beautiful. Your presence There's nothing left. So our love sings to you. Hallelujah. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah. There are no words. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's nothing left. So our love sings to you. Oh, there are no words to describe your love. Our love. That's all we have left to offer. Just one look of your face, you are dearest Father, the closest friend, most beautiful. You are most beautiful. Oh, and there are no words. It's not. We sing, oh. You've been that good to us, 'cause you've been that faithful to us. My love, my life, let it sing. There are no words. This is my story. This is my song. Praising my Savior all the day long. Just one look, is enough. One look is enough to change everything. With just one look, my life was changed. My body was healed. My family restored. My life rescued with just one look. My life was changed. My life was changed. My life was changed. Just one. On Calvary, you looked at me. On Calvary, you looked at me. On Calvary, you looked at me with just one. On Calvary, you looked at me. On Calvary, you looked at me. On Calvary, you looked at me with just one. You're not the only one looking, but he says I am looking too. He says with just one, I see my son and daughter, and I don't have to second guess. I don't have to second look. With just one. On Calvary, you looked at me. On Calvary, you looked at me. On Calvary, you looked at me.